All right, here we are. Welcome everyone to the Synchron LinkedIn Live. I'm very excited for this one. Today, we're going to be focusing on optimizing the service supply chain in India. And I have two guests with me today, and I'm very excited for the discussion. Guys, I think I was mentioning to you earlier that last time I was in Delhi was 2007. And it's very exciting to see all the new changes in the city. And of course, that also brings changes to the aftermarket space and the service supply chain. So very excited for our session today. Why don't we start out with some quick introductions, and then we can get into our discussion today. So Ashish, why don't you kick us off with an intro?
Thanks, Saran. Thanks for having me for this session, first of all. I'm Ashish Kanoje. I work as a sales manager for Synchron, take care of Asia business. I have around 12 years of experience in the digital transformation domain, working for manufacturing industries in the various set of verticals, starting from manufacturing to supply chain to digital technologies. I look forward for very nice interactions today with Sarang and Neeraj. Yeah.
Great. Yep. Neeraj, why don't you go next?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Sarang, for the invite. I hope it's going to be a new experience in my repertoire. So, hi everyone, this is Neeraj. I'm the subject matter expert for Synchron. I have a wide experience dealing with supply chain of a lot of MNCs, OEMs. I work in a pre-sales functions of the sales cycle and deal with EMEA and APAC geo, and we look at the prospect customers, and we try to deliver the value that we can do with our portfolio of solutions that we have. So that's me.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. And again, thank you again for joining this session. Everyone, my name is Sarang Sambari, and I am the Senior Director of Industry Solutions at Synchron. A little bit of background, I've spent the last 17 years working in the aftermarket space, and I've been at Synchron now for about 2 years. And yeah, quite a bit of change in the space. And look, typically when we do these LinkedIn Lives, a lot of times we like to kick off the session with maybe an interesting fact or maybe a story that we've heard recently. I have one for both of you that I didn't even think about, right? So last week I was meeting with one of our customers, and they were telling me that a few years ago, and a little bit of background on this customer. This is a customer that is an automotive distributor, and they work in a number of different countries across Southeast Asia. And they were telling me a few years ago, they were introducing some electric vehicles. They were starting to work with an electric vehicle OEM. And they had an interesting use case. They said, look, with the electric vehicles, they use these regenerative braking systems. And so for those that don't understand what that is, basically it's a new braking system that you find on many electric and hybrid vehicles. And it processes energy a little bit of a different way. And what ends up happening is when you lift your foot off of the gas pedal, the car starts braking a little bit more. And it's great. I mean, there is a lot of pros to that sort of system, and it saves quite a bit of energy. But for the driver, it actually takes some time getting used to that sort of system. It's not the same as, putting your foot on the brake pedal. And also on top of that, in the early versions of these vehicles, when somebody would take their foot off of the gas pedal, the brake lights would not necessarily come on. So the car is slowing down pretty quickly, but now the brake lights are not going on. So you can imagine what happened, right? There were significantly more accidents with that sort of vehicle. And so with this distributor, from an aftermarket perspective, they had to stock many additional service parts components. And it was interesting to think about. I mean, there's so many, little pieces of criteria, so many different use cases when you think about the aftermarket space. Neeraj, I know you were telling me the story earlier about vehicles even traveling in a certain area that are high accident areas, and you have to stock more service parts inventory. So just really interesting to hear those use cases. And one thing before we get into this group discussion, last year, Synchron had completed a research study where we interviewed 500 aftermarket leaders, CIOs, CFOs, and we asked them a number of different questions about their aftermarket business. It was very interesting to hear one of the key takeaways was that these organizations felt that if they could make the right operational improvements, if they could make the right technology investments, they could drive on average an additional 10.5% in profitability for their aftermarket business. That's very interesting to hear. And that's also, one of the reasons why Synchron has focused on the aftermarket space, right? We are a company that has built technology solutions for aftermarket. Where our company focuses today is things like inventory planning, service parts pricing, as well as service execution, again, all focused on the aftermarket space. So guys, why don't we open it up to a little bit of a group discussion? I guess before we go any further, let's define the service supply chain or even the aftermarket space. We're going to be using these words quite a bit, so let's talk a little bit about what does that even mean. And Neeraj, if you want, why don't you kick us off, because you've worked with so many different customers.
Sure, Sarang. So when we talk about aftermarket or service supply chain, it simply means if you are an OEM or a distributor company or an auto ancillary company, once your asset is within the market or the field, right? How do you support that asset if and when there is a failure to that asset, right? So to support that asset, if there is a failure, right, then you need a certain execution platform to look at that failure, right, and to be able to service the customer in a timely fashion, right? For a two-wheeler company or for a three-wheeler or a four-wheeler company, it could be a use case of them coming to the garage and then showing their asset to the technician, and then technician looking at if they have the parts available in the right quantity, so that they can service that asset on the first go, right? And it is really, really important to have the right level of inventory and have the right set of parts available right where where the customer is close to the customer, right? So in a nutshell, everything to do with if after your asset is sold and is there in the field, to give the right service to the customer, you need a proper mechanism to service your asset and provide the right availability to the customers to support all the failures that may happen with respect to the asset. So that is after sales for me.
Makes sense. And Ashish, maybe a question for you. As you've worked with so many different organizations, I mean, why is this so critical? Why is the aftermarket space so critical for all of these different businesses? I mean, Neeraj gave the example of even in the automotive space, right? Let's say I'm an end customer. There's a problem with my vehicle. If I bring my car into a depot or into the dealership, and that dealership comes back and says, I know how to fix your vehicle, but I'm not going to be able to get parts for 6 weeks, I'm not going to be a very happy customer, and I'm probably going to go somewhere else to get my vehicle repaired. But Ashish, I mean, you've worked in so many different industries. What's your view? Why is it so important to focus on aftermarket?
As Neeraj rightly mentioned, that what I would summarize maybe in a nutshell is aftermarket is basically a a secondary market for most of the OEMs, right? Which technically is true, but with the advancement in the industry and also increasing the consumer market, that secondary market is actually becoming a primary market for most of the OEMs now, because there is an increase in focus on services activities, right? And why it is very, very important is aftermarket is just not about providing the spares and parts or the components to the consumers or the dealers, but it also deals with the various other things. Like it also talks about the warranty, it also talks about the customer satisfaction, it also makes sure that your customer brand value is intact if you provide proper services to the customers at the right time. So it's very important to look at after service market as a primary market for every OEM, because it brings in lot of customer inputs, customer loyalty, and lot of brand proposition in the customer's mind. So to look at it in a very broader fashion, aftermarket deals with typical activities like maintenance, repairing, inspections sometimes, where customer gets involved directly. And it's very important that how effectively we provide services to the customer. When I say effectively, it's not only about providing the services on time, but how we maintain the happy index with the customer throughout the services life cycle, starting from the registration of the equipment, or the starting from a moment when customer comes to you with your asset, vehicle, or equipment, to the point that equipment goes out with all the activities done. So it's very important to take care of all those small things, which gives a lot of customer satisfactions at every stage of the services cycle. And that is where the aftermarket is becoming very, very important segment for every OEM. And to add on financially on top of it, it has not remained the small segment of their business now. Aftermarket segment is growing at a very, very rapid speed, be it any OEM from any industry. So it's very important to give a proper focus to the aftermarket business, give all the attention which requires in order to keep the customer intact with the brand, and also have a positive awareness for the brand they serve it. Yeah, that's my view, Sarang.
Yeah, no, it's a great note. And I remember even last year when I was talking with our CEO, Fritz, he made a really important comment. He said the key to being successful for all of these OEMs really over the next decade will be loyalty. It will be customer loyalty. From my perspective, the aftermarket business is truly the face of a company, right? That is the touch point with a customer. And I think you build a lot of loyalty when things go wrong, when your asset is down, when your vehicle is not working. How quickly are those organizations able to get you up and running and not disrupt what's going on in your business? That's what builds loyalty, and I think that's what builds trust as well.
Yeah.
Good. Look, I'd like to transition a little bit, because one of the things that we get into, or one of the discussions that we get into quite a bit, and I know both of you are experts at navigating this sort of discussion, is just even understanding on the inventory side, what are the differences between even production planning and aftermarket planning? Why is aftermarket planning so different than even production planning? I know companies today use all sorts of different technology solutions on the production side of their business. Why do you even need to think about having something more sophisticated on the aftermarket side?
Yeah, if I can go first, Neeraj.
Sure.
The way we look at the production planning and the aftermarket services inventory planning are completely different segments. We generally end up comparing that if I have a very nice production planning system in place, that will take care of all the aftermarket services planning as well. But the criteria and the drivers for supply chain or inventory activities in aftermarket business is quite different, right? So just to give you a few examples, so in case of production planning, you have a very predictable, consistent forecast of what is going to be needed for the production of your assets or equipment inside the factory. But aftermarket inventory planning is completely dependent upon uh, uh, what's going to fail maybe someday, right? And that's completely unpredictable. So the demand which comes up from the aftermarket side of the things is quite erratic, unpredictable, and it's very difficult to gauge those demands until we get into the minds of the customers, or we map them somehow along with their assets. Second is the drivers. As I mentioned, the equipment failure is the driver in the aftermarket business. But in case of production planning, it's more of like the market demands, right? Your teams gives you input that this is the sort of vehicles or assets I will be needing in these quarters for the business activities, and then the production plan gets built. But in aftermarket business, it is completely different. And demand can come at any time, right? There is no specific date or timelines. So equipment can fail at any point of time, and customer will come back to you saying that, yeah, I just need the spare parts in next 2 days, or maybe in just 2 hours. So how do we keep ourselves ready for that? So these are like various demand drivers, various inputs, which actually adds on lots of complexity to the aftermarket
Right.
businesses, and makes it completely different than the production planning activities, or the production planning for the manufacturing activities. So we should consider those points while we decide on the inventory planning, or the inventory management part of the aftermarket businesses. And it's very essential to consider those points to have a proper supply of required goods to the customer places, or to the dealer locations. So we can't just see that I'll just utilize my existing production planning system and make sure that it operates for the aftermarket services business too. So that could be a very difficult thing to be in, or thing to implement for the aftermarket business. That's my view on.
Yeah.
And so,
No, it's good. Neeraj, it'd be very curious to hear your view as
Sure.
well,
Yeah.
even looking at like the number of SKUs in the space.
Absolutely. So looking at number of SKUs, so in the aftermarket space, as a OEM or a distributor company, you have to support the entire asset throughout the life cycle of the asset, right? Versus if you are producing a finished good, you are only concerned about certain limited set of SKUs, right? If you talk about aftermarket, the variants are coming and going. The customers are demanding variety of colors, and there are for a single model, there are like 5-6 variants, right? So because of these variants and the demanding customers in the market, for the aftermarket, there are a lot of SKUs that you have to maintain to support this asset throughout the life cycle of the asset, right? Versus if you compare it with a production supply chain, there you have a limited set of SKUs that you have to maintain, and basically whatever finished goods you are manufacturing, all the components that you need to manufacture that finished good. So only those assets, only those components you need to buy for the production supply chain. Versus aftermarket, you have to buy everything which is currently there in the field, right? Then, secondly, the scope of the planning for the after sales is the entire network of distribution that you have.
Yeah.
Right? Versus like production parts planning, where you are only focused on the manufacturing plant. Versus aftermarket would be your complete your mother warehouse, regional warehouses, your distributors, your dealers. So it's a complete network that you have to manage in order to give the right service for your aftermarket business.
Yeah, that's interesting. I last year I attended a conference and I heard an interesting stat that said, the average length of time that vehicles are in service is about 9 years. And so, Neeraj, this goes back to your point of just the number of SKUs, right? Because now you're trying to support this vehicle over a 9-year period, which it's probably not even getting produced anymore. So how do you manage all the service parts components? And that's okay. That's on the automotive side of things. In other industries, construction equipment, mining equipment. I think I heard one time I was working with a utility company, and one of their service leaders told me some of these assets have been in the ground for 40 years, 50 years, right? Think about trying to stock inventory for something like that. So it can get, I think it can get very, very complex. And, there's a number of additional factors. Interesting.
Right. So
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Before so it is really, really difficult, because now, if your lifespan is increasing for the asset, right, you need to go back to the supplier and give them, like a long or a last time buy kind of a requirement, right? The supplier is going to say that, they are not going to manufacture these spare parts over a period of 40 years for the, if you gave an example for utility business, right?
Sure.
So there it is really, really challenging as an OEM to, discuss with the supplier that, you need to support us throughout the life cycle of this asset, right? So that is another area, for the aftermarket business, right? We need a scientific way of, planning out such longer assets in the field in the aftermarket business. Yeah.
Yeah, Neeraj, I think you're spot on there. And also, maybe we just take a step back. Let's look at what's happened in the market over the past, 5 years, 6 years. I mean, we've been through COVID now, and a lot of the OEMs that I talk to, they've gone through some time where the sales of their new equipment was starting to slow a little bit, right? Many organizations maybe were delaying the purchase of new capital equipment. So what does that mean, right? That means that the assets that are in the field today have to last much longer. Even think about the construction space. Maybe if I was a construction company, every 7 years, 8 years, I'm planning on, purchasing some new equipment. Now, maybe it's every 10 years or every 12 years, I'm going to purchase some new equipment. Now that means my existing equipment has to stay operational much longer. How do you do that? You focus on the maintenance and you focus on the repair work associated with that equipment, and you make sure that it has the right components that are getting put into all of those assets. So I think even when we step back and we take a look at the market, there's a lot of changes that we've even seen over the past 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's transition a little bit, because a lot of times, let me pose this as a question. I think, Neeraj, you were mentioning earlier that all of these organizations are looking for high availability of their parts. So why don't I just stock tons of inventory? That way I can always meet my service level agreements, right? You even mentioned, hey, some of these service level agreements are 2 hours, maybe 4 hours to get parts to a customer. Why don't I just stock a whole lot of inventory?
So if you stock a whole set of items in your warehouses, then it is going to explode your work. The investments that you need to have that higher level of inventory in your warehouses, right? And generally, when we discuss with OEMs or the planners who are sitting and planning out this inventory, they are sitting in very limited set of budgets that they have, or a working capital that they have, right? And they need a a very refined way or a smart way of deciding, if they have a limited capital, how they can pick and choose. If for example they have 1 lakh rupees, how they can use that 1 lakh rupees in a smart way to get the maximum juice out of that 1 lakh rupees, right? To cover the maximum number of customer requests whatever working capital you have, right? So this is where the availability, having the right balance between the availability and the cost that you are going to spend to achieve that availability is very, very important. And there are, a lot of challenges associated with this trade-off, right? I would say between the cost that you want to put in versus, how much of availability you will get out of that, right? So I have seen that it is really, really important to decide what is the right set of items you want to keep on stock, right? That is the baseline, right? If you have 100 items, then all the 100 items may not be, getting the activity or, getting consumed over a period of time, right? So as a planner, you first need to decide out of 100, what are those 90 items I want to keep on stock, right? And while doing so, you need to be cognizant of the fact that you have a working capital which is limited, right? You cannot say that 90 items that I'm keeping on stock, I'll do 99.9% of availability. It doesn't make sense, right? If you do 99.9% availability, then it will again explode your working, whatever investments you need to reach that level of service, right? So while doing so, I have seen that there are fluctuations coming from the demand side, which is the number one challenge, for the planners, to have this balance created between the cost and the availability. If you have a lot of fluctuations in the demand, then it really becomes difficult to forecast and then plan out the inventory, right? And then secondly, from the supply side also, right? If the supplier is not giving you the constant supply, right, and they are delaying the delivery of the goods, and they are not sticking to the promised lead time, then it really becomes as a tough task for the planners to maintain a right level of inventory, right? So these two are, I think, the prime challenges that I see in maintaining the trade-off between the cost that you incur versus the availability that you want to maintain, right? The fluctuation in demand and the fluctuation in the supply, right? If we do that, then we'll have a good balance between your cost and the availability that you want to give to the end customer.
There's maybe a question for both of you. As you look at India, or even as you look at Southeast Asia, let's say, all regions around the world are continuing to face supply chain issues. Neeraj, when you think about going back to suppliers and getting components, I mean, what's your read on these supply chain issues? Are we out of the area of concern? Is everything going to be great moving forward, or do we have some challenges that we have to overcome, especially in India or Southeast Asia?
I think the real challenge, as a OEM manager sitting in the OEM warehouse, the real challenge is to have a good relationship with the supplier. These days, generally what we have seen at OEMs, they rely on a single supplier to deliver the full share of business, right? And there is not enough kind of a stress testing with that supplier. For example, if we have a similar kind of a scenario that happened during COVID, right? If one supplier is constrained and he cannot deliver goods to you, then what is your plan B, right? We need to have a plan B always in our kitty, right? Well, this is where I see that every now and then we need to do a stress test with our suppliers, and we need to, never give the entire business to a single supplier, right? Mm-hmm. If we rely and depend upon a single supplier to deliver the goods, then the supply chain issues are always going to happen, and there will be entire dependency on a single supplier, right? But I see that this trend of we were there, Ashish and I were there in that event in Pune, and there most of the OEM automotive companies were there, and all the component companies, manufacturers were also there. So there the discussion was around the same topic, where they were talking having a good relationships with the supplier, and then while doing so, you need to have your plan A and plan B and plan C if there is a disruption happening from the supply side, right? So these companies are thinking, I think, uh, you know, uh, they are on the right track, and let's hope we are never going to have such kind of disruptions, be it
Sure.
coming from the Suez Canal or be it coming because of COVID, right?
Sure. Makes sense. I mean, Ashish, I think Niraj teed you up perfectly. So what happens if you do nothing, right? What happens if you're in a business today and you're continuing to use your current process for planning inventory, or maybe I mean, look, there's plenty of organizations that we work with today where before moving forward with a Synchron solution, they were using Excel, or there wasn't really a process around their planning. So what's really the cost of doing nothing? What's the cost of standing still?
Yeah, before we jump into that question, Saran, I just wanted to add on to what Neeraj was saying,
Sure.
that how do we depend on only one supplier or only one dealer sometimes, right, for the sourcing of the components or the parts. So there was a nice point raised by someone that how we can involve the suppliers as well as sometimes the dealers as a part of our ecosystem, right? Building relationship is one aspect, but getting them in our ecosystem in terms of providing them right forecast, that these are the kinds of these are my production plans for the next 2 quarters, for the next 3 quarters, right? Then the suppliers can be ready with what we are expecting from them. And same is the case goes with the dealers as within the aftermarket businesses, right? If we involve them as a part of our ecosystem, then we get a continuous feedback from the dealer that these are the sort of customers I'm expecting in maybe in next 2 quarters, or this is the kind of historical trend we have observed in the past, and this is the kind of insights we have to share with you. So if we somehow get them as a part of the OEM ecosystem, both from the supplier side as well as from the aftermarket side, then that makes a lot of things easier. I'm not saying that it will solve all the issues, but it will obviously help you take a proper action at the right time, so that we serve the customer at the end of the day and get ready for whatever things we are equipped for. So that is what I wanted to add to Nidhar's point. But adding on to the what if you don't do nothing, right? There are a lot of things which we will miss out. The first thing is missed opportunities. If we don't have right set of forecast coming to the OEM for aftermarket businesses, for example, then either we end up keeping less stock, which will not full the servicing activities completely, and customer will get dissatisfied at the end of the day. But if we keep a lot of stock in our warehouses and don't utilize it, then we end up burning working capital, right? As this was mentioned. So there are like missed opportunities as well as the optimization in the working capital can be the area to look at. The second one is if you don't know which are the equipments coming into the warranty cycle, for example, in next 2 quarters, next 3 quarters, what are the equipments are in warranty or in the extended warranty, then you won't be ready. So we have to find a fundamental way of getting equipments or the assets in our ecosystem, so that we are aware that these kind of equipments will be enrolled for the warranty, and we should be ready for this sort of parts or components, so that we provide them a right set of services. Obviously, if we are unable to service our customer properly, then there will be a dissatisfaction inside the customer's mind, and that will lead to, again, your brand loyalty will get affected completely, right? And at the end of the day, in the consumer market, it's all boils down to what customers are speaking in the public forums. Absolutely. That's your biggest marketing, right? Yep. So the brand loyalty will be protected only by having a proper services plan in place. So when I say services, it is not only about having the right set of parts or the inventory in place, but services actually starts from from the conceptualization phase to the services development to the services procurement, then the logistic and distribution comes in. Then how do we analyze the quality of the services we are delivering? Are we maintaining or seeing any KPIs that is my customer happy with the services I'm providing? Are we taking constant feedback? Are we considering customer as a part of the ecosystem, maybe directly or through dealerships? So that's very important to maintain the brand loyalty. Customer at the end of the day should feel that yes, I'm a part of this brand, and it should be a personalized approach and not like a blanketing of marketing activities surrounded around the market.
Right.
So these are the various things I thought about when I talk about cost of losing a lot of things if we don't perform proper services activity. So there are many more things to add on, but what I feel is if we keep the right stock in place, which will help us perform the right set of services, that will ultimately increase the customer satisfaction, which will again increase the brand loyalty and will help you grow the revenue at the end of the day, right? It's not only about services revenue, it's only services, but it's also about growing the services business in the sector. That's what I'm thinking at.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. I mean, I truly believe, and maybe I'm a little bit biased because I've spent so much time in this space, but I've seen more and more OEMs prioritize their aftermarket business, and it truly becomes a differentiator for their business. I mean, even, Ashish, you're talking about customer loyalty. If you have a differentiated service offering, that's how you build a loyal customer base, right? All of a sudden, from an OEM perspective, especially in the B2B space, now, you've transitioned your relationship with your end customer from another OEM to a strategic partner for a business. And so I think this is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
Guys, we have a little bit of time left in the session. One thing I wanted to do is we're at the beginning of the year. We're halfway through February. I can't actually believe that we're already almost through February. But okay, what's the outlook for this year? Right, as you look at challenges that we see in even in India or even Southeast Asia, as we look at areas of opportunity, what are we already anticipating as some challenges for this year? And where do you see organizations investing today? Neeraj, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So speaking from India's, growth, which is happening in India. So with respect to India, we see that economy and GDP is growing at a massive pace now. And with that happening, the customers are, getting, their purchase power is increasing day by day. And with that happening, that they are getting, demanding day by day. Well, that is, one of the challenges that I see for the OEMs, that, customers are getting demanding day by day. They need the right service for their assets. And if they don't get it, then there is a lot of competition in the market, right? They will not even think, twice, and then they will go to the other brand, right? The customers, the competition is increasing. The customers are getting educated day by day, and their purchasing powers are increasing, right? So there is a massive opportunities for the OEMs to gain profits out of that. Along with that, I see that market dynamics are changing in India, especially. I can give you an example of like EV space, right? Now in India, the EV space is also picking, right? Every fourth vehicle that you see on the road is a EV at this stage. So another challenge, which may come up because now all these petrol and diesel vehicles, which are there in the field, right? We need a proper way of supporting these vehicles, right? We need a proper aftermarket way of, supporting these vehicles throughout a tenure of at least 15 years, right? That's the life cycle of a vehicle in India, right? So these are some of the challenges I see, that market dynamics are changing and customer is getting educated. and competition is so fierce that if you don't give a service on a single instance, then you lose the market share very quickly, right? So that is what I see as challenges for 2024 for the OEMs.
Got it. Got it. Ashish, what about, I guess, the other side of the question? So we know the challenges. Where do you see organizations making investments? How are they preparing?
Yeah, so with challenges, there's always a lot of areas as opportunity comes up, right? And all the OEMs which I have frequent interactions with, they are investing heavily into the digital technologies, right? While they have some sort of operation already established to manage the aftermarket services businesses in the various spaces, but they are investing into the technologies which will help them get a proper insights from the consumer side of the business. So they don't want to rely heavily on the distributors, dealers, but they want to drill down till the consumer networks, right? So that they hear out what consumer is actually thinking about and what kind of feedback they are receiving from the consumer. Because direct feedback is always very, very essential for the improvements, right? Activities inside the organization. So,
Sure.
So there is a lot of investment happening. The second area where I feel is OEMs and also the lot of automotive components companies are investing heavily into AI and ML related use cases. Be it a demand forecasting use case, right, or be it knowing the consumer behavior use case, or having the right set of marketing intelligence use case, or the servicing use case for the warranty. So lots of investments happening in this area because every OEM is strategizing consumer as a part of their strategy now, right? They are not leaving consumer behind, right? They want consumer to be a part of their strategy, and
Sure.
This sort of technologies are enabling them to get consumer onboarded for the right set of feedbacks, inputs, and then they can provide the right set of services to them to have their brand intact in their mind. Yeah.
Sure. I'll give you one from my side. So as I mentioned at the beginning of our session, we did this research study last year where we interviewed all of these CIOs and CFOs and heads of aftermarket. From a technology perspective, one of the key insights was that many of these organizations were looking at implementing solutions that had sort of a modular approach. It seemed like many of these organizations were using a number of different platforms in their business, and they were looking for different solutions or additional platforms that were modular that could complement their existing technology stack. And I think one of the reasons for that is when you take a little bit more of a modular approach to new technology solutions, usually those solutions can be implemented a little bit faster, right? It's not the 2.5-year implementation cycle. It's 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, and let's start to see some ROI pretty quickly, and then move into phase 2, phase 3 of our project. So that was one of the key insights from our research study. So team, I know we got to close out our session today, and again, thank you so much for your time. But one last thing I want to do today, and look, I've got my pen and I've got my paper ready. I want to ask both of you. I mean, both of you advise aftermarket leaders every day. This is what you do every single day. So what I want is one piece of advice from each of you. What would be, if you were sitting in the room with an aftermarket leader right now, what would be your one piece of advice for them as they look at this year and next year? Niraj, you're up first. Go ahead.
Sure. I think the need of the hour is to have an integrated platform or a connected platform, between all the ends of supply chain, or the nodes of supply chain, right? So starting with supplier is supplying to mother warehouse or the regional warehouse, right? So all the ends of supply chain in an integrated platform is the need of the hour, right? Suppliers, your OEM warehouses, your dealers, distributors, and your then end customer, right? So all these important nodes of the supply chain in an integrated platform, and to create a single source of truth for your consumers and for your all nodes of supply chain. I think that is the critical piece. And to add to that, once we create this platform, then we need to measure the performance of your entire supply chain, and optimize and fine tune your supply chain, as in when there is a KPI which is going off, right? We need to adjust. Seeing that KPI, like the service level could be one of the KPIs, right? You can see how many requests you're getting from the customer side, and were you able to fulfill that request in the full quantity, right? If you want to be at certain level of service, so that could be one of the KPI that you can see, and try and improve on that KPI over a monthly bucket or over a quarterly bucket, right? So that level of capabilities you would need, all your ends of supply chain configured in a single platform, and then a BI capability to track the performance of your supply chain. That will cover the complete wheel that you need to optimize the supply chain.
Yeah. Neeraj, I love that. And look, I can't tell you that we won't use that for some marketing material, or maybe put it onto our next research study. I mean, wow, connecting supplier, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but connecting supplier, OEM, dealer, maybe even end customer on one platform, creating a single source of truth. And then, like you said, once you have all those connections made on one platform, now you can look at optimizing the service supply chain across all of these users. That's amazing. Ashish, you're up next. I know a hard act to follow here.
So, Neeraj has actually covered all the aspects, right? But what I would like to tell aftermarket service leader is they should think on investing into the processes and technologies where they strategize the customer as a part of their center, because at the end of the day, everything boils down to how customer is satisfied. So they should focus more on the proactive maintenance than the reactive maintenance. They should focus on the complete services cycle, starting from service inception to the logistic distribution, and also take up proactive feedback. It's not like that I have provided a service, then that's it. They should come up with some strategies where they get a continuous feedback from the customer in the form of some digital platforms. They rate those feedbacks on a regular basis and gets the improvement done as and when required. So they should invest into technologies which will help them reach out to their customer at the ground level in a better fashion. These technologies could be anything. It could be like a inventory management solutions, like Neeraj mentioned. It could be services offerings. It could be warranty solution, or sometimes it could be a pricing solutions as well for the spare parts. So they should see these solutions in a focused way, because that's the need of the hour, and start some investment in these particular areas. Yeah.
I like it. Yeah, I think many organizations are trying to figure out, how do we move from a reactive to a proactive, and then maybe even when you start to look at things like artificial intelligence, a predictive state of service. And I think the mindset now is the customer has to be at the center of everything that you do.
Yeah.
Excellent. Guys, I literally have a laundry list of notes here. Thank you so much for this session. This has been amazing. Lots of change again that we see, especially in India, and different ways that organizations are prioritizing aftermarket. So thank you so much for the insights today, and thank you so much for our listeners. This LinkedIn Live, we're live right now, but this whole session has been recorded. So if you'd like to go back and listen to it, you're more than welcome to. All right, everyone, have a great week. Have a great weekend. And thank you so much. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for inviting us. Thank you.